Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Risk Matrix
The
Videocast
Risk Matrix,
podcast.
roll tide, baby. Mr.
Roll
Richard's
Tide,
in
baby.
the Matrix.
You're in the Matrix, Richard. I'm sorry, or I'm delighted.
I got to say one thing: Boomer sooner.
That's right.
So I'm not going to get into any fight about football teams or sports teams because I'm not really that adept at knowing things about sports teams. So we're going to roll right in here with James. Richard, before we the proper feting that you deserve, James has something to read for one of our sponsors.
Today's episode, The Risk Matrix by Veriforce, is sponsored by Columbia Southern University. Dr. Martin is a faculty member, and I have my master's degree in occupational safety and health from CSU. Columbia Southern was founded in 1993 as an alternative to the traditional university for busy working adults. CSU offers online associates, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in addition to certificate programs. CSU's occupational safety and health degrees are recognized by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals as qualified programs. Veriforce members, instructors, and evaluators receive a 10% learning partner discount. Visit columbiasouthern.edu to begin your educational journey today.
And James, I just want to add one thing. They are a regionally accredited university through SACS COC. Congratulations and kudos to them. Makes their degrees even better than they already were. So regionally accredited university, great stuff. So let's roll into this episode here. We've got a esteemed guest, Mr. Richard Emberling. He works for Veriforce. He's got a few years in safety and auditing, which is something we want to talk about. So Richard, welcome to the show. And I don't know if you want to give yourself any more introduction than that. I think I was light on that. Tell us about you.
Well, thank you, Linda and James, for having me today. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I actually started in the oil and gas industry back in 1971. Actually, it was probably in '69. I first started working in the oil patch on workover rigs, and then I spent 4 years in the Navy, come right back out and went back into the oil and gas industry, where I've been working on drilling rigs. I've worked for Dowwell, which was a competitor of Halliburton back in the day, and we did cracking and cementing and all. And then I went into work for Mobile Oil and was in the gas plants and was process safety management coordinator for them when process safety management came in. So been doing audits for a long time, back in the 90s when we really got started with the contractors coming into our plants, that were PSDM certified and all. And I've been doing audits now for Veriforce since 2018.
Well,
all right. That's a great.
Go ahead, Dr. Martin.
I'm just going to say that's a great introduction, and that's a good roll in to what I want to talk to you about, because I know that James has been doing a lot of audits lately for some bigger companies, and I know he's learned from you a lot of the tricks of the trade. So James, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to walk over you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Richard's being a little bashful in his autobiography of his career. One thing he left out is Richard Emberling is a tremendous mentor to other safety professionals, and he doesn't get enough credit for it. Everything that I think I know about safety, I learned from two people, Richard Emberling and the late Larry Bryce. And I want to thank Richard for what he does, not just for me, but for other safety professionals. We talked about this in another episode. If you're a young, inexperienced safety professional, find you a Richard Emberling. Find you a Richard Emberling and listen to what they have to say. So thank you, Richard, for joining us. And hopefully today we'll get into some of the aspects of your current role with Veriforce and what you're seeing through field assessments and audits, and what's important to consider when you're conducting a field assessment and an audit.
So I don't know kind of how you want to kick this off, James. I know that you're both deep into the audits here. Um, I guess Richard, what kind of for Veriforce, what kind of sites are you seeing? Are you like, is it a wide range, or is there a industry that you work in more often?
Or less, still in the oil and gas for the most part. I do a lot of audits on contractors for these larger operators, and I go in and we dig into their policies and procedures. It usually takes about 2 days to really go through their policies, procedures. That's just on site. Then there's some things that we do even after that, so it's a pretty intensive audit. And we go out into the field and we ensure that those things are being done that we found in the documentation and the policies and stuff. Are they being carried out into the field? I'm kind of like James. I hate to see paper safety. I want to see it out there in the field. I want to see it implemented. And that's the big thing, is finding out if it's being carried out into the field.
Are you finding that people are carrying it out in the field? What's
No.
the percentage of people that actually do what they say they're going to do?
Very, very low. I want to say probably 25 to 30% will do what they say they're going to do. And
James, do you find the same?
I do. I do.
Sorry.
I do. And, one of the things I think both Mr. Richard and I see when we're doing audits or assessments of a contractor's safety management system is they may be good in a pre-qualification stage. Many are not, but they may be good in a pre-qualification stage, but pre-qualification stage is not an intensive gap analysis of your safety management system. And I routinely find gaps in the written programs, in the training, and especially in the implementation side. And so I think Mr. Richard sees that as well. One of the things that separates the assessments that Richard and I do when we're assessing or auditing a company's safety management system that's a little bit different than what you might see in some other traditional audits and assessments is we spend a lot of time, I would say at least 5 days worth of work digging into an organization's documentation. And Richard, if you would talk about that process and what you do, what you're looking for, and what you found typically in the assessments you've done over the last few years.
Okay. Our procedure, and you said about 5 days, but actually our procedure, when we get into it and we sat down and looked at all the time that we spent on conducting these audits, it runs probably about 65 hours. Really, when you take in all the time that we do in the field, we do in the office with the contractor, and then also writing the report and doing the due diligence to go in and find the right standards, making sure that we do the proper assessment. So it's a pretty long drawn out thing, but it's a very in-depth audit. So our process is that we, as of right now, it depends on the operator. We have one right now that wants us to go out and do the field assessment first, and then come back in and decide whether we need to really get into and look at their policies and procedures. But it's very seldom that I go out and in the field and don't come back in and need to know a little bit more, So I just got through with one this past week, and I've got to dig into it a lot more in depth as well. So, but then we spend a couple of days, digging into their policies, procedures, and talking to them if we go into their office, it's face to face, but sometimes we can do it over the Teams meeting or something of that nature. And but they're notified that we're doing the audit while we're out there. And so they're aware, and we begin to dig up that information out there. We do employee interviews. I'm looking for, have they been trained? What kind of training are they doing? you know, in the interviews, a lot of times we find that they're not doing any training, or we find that they've just done a safety orientation, just a very, very basic awareness. And here these guys are out there doing confined spaces, working at heights and stuff. So, you know, and when we find that, that's where we really have to dig in and do a lot more in depth. But it's a very good process that we have, and we really do a thorough job in going in and digging into these things.
Let me ask you this. I had a thought while you were talking about going out and talking to the people and seeing what they're doing, and are they doing what they're saying they're doing. Do you ever get into, and this is kind of a loaded question, because James and I have been doing a lot of these lately, these psychological safety surveys. And do you ever find that people know what they're supposed to do? They've had good training. They you know, they got all the tools. You know, we talked about this on a previous, they have all the tools they need, not more, not less, but they have what they need to do. But yet they still don't make good decisions in the field by the, you know, the force of other factors. And when we talk psychological safety, which is what James and I are looking at companies, is, you know, do they get that team atmosphere that they can stop work? Do they get that they should slow down? Do they get those things? And are there pressures from the outside? Can you detect that when you do audits?
Oh yes, absolutely. You know, when we get started in the interviews and employees, you know, and it's just not one employee that I talk to. I will go around and try to talk to as many as I can, and you can really feel, you know, what they're saying. You know, they might not come right out and say, no, we don't do this, or I know I'm supposed to be doing this, but I don't. But you can tell by their body language, their tone, the way they look at you, you know, and sometimes the way they smile and say what they,
Yep.
you know. So yeah, you can get a lot from an interview. And I just was thinking about that the other day. I went and looked and visited with a worker who had 23 years in the oil and gas industry, and he knew a lot more. He had been trained very well in previous operations and stuff, and you know, but he knew that things weren't things, you know. So yeah, you can tell a lot from an interview.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're seeing is some of the corrective actions that come out of James's audits and other people audits are that, you know, sometimes things are good and you can fix the policies and procedures and you can fix the safety management system. And a lot of people go that far, but you need to go the next step and make sure that people are okay expressing themselves and doing the right thing, even when it takes longer or may change the process. And that's like the next, I mean, I don't think that's part of the audit, but I think a good auditor, should they be properly mentored and trained, should be able to read body language in those types of things. And I think that's a really important part of the audit. I mean, that's just me. What say you both?
Well, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. If you cannot read the body language and kind of read that person, you don't really get the full story, you know. And so it's very important. And I'll let James kind of expound on that a little bit as well. But I'm a very, very firm believer you've got to read the body language.
I think being an auditor and an assessor is more of an art than it is a science. You know, and that's where certain other maybe audits that we're doing or assessments that we're doing internally stop short. Yes, no, yes, no. Do we have this? Do we not have that? And sometimes it's very nuanced when you're looking at a company's safety management system. You know, they have a program, and what I find is most programs are in isolation, meaning we have a written program because somebody told us we needed to have a written program, and it sits there and it's there. But the interdependency, how it works with other programs, and you'll look at those other programs and you'll see there's some conflict there. So the challenge is to look through all of that to see how it should fit together and find where the feedback loops are lacking. And a lot of times where it's lacking is you may have really good written policies and procedures, which is a rarity. Mr. Richard will tell you it's a rarity to find really good written policies and procedures, right? But
Absolutely.
even if when you find really good written policies and procedures, are they being implemented? Have we moved from the paper safety side of the house into the implementation side of the house? And oftentimes, believe it or not, I find that the safety professionals themselves have no idea what their policies and procedures say. They didn't write them. They are happy that they have a good score in a third-party verification system, and that is it. And I implore safety professionals, you need to read your policies and procedures. Pre-qualification is that, it's pre-qualification. You need to know what it is that you say you're going to do. If you
need to verify.
If you don't read your policies and procedures and you have an incident, you'll get to read them at the deposition. Okay? You'll get
It's funny, not funny.
with the compliance officer. So, you know, so many times, and we talked about this on an earlier episode, that safety professionals, particularly in smaller companies, those less than 150 employees, have a lot to do. There's a lot on them, and the ratio between safety professionals and workers is way out of whack. The average company that I think Richard and I assessed, 150 employees with one, maybe two safety professionals. And they have a lot of demands on their time. They have to do training, they have to do site inspections, they have to go out and you know, do incident and accident investigations. A lot of times they're doing drug testing. Now you have an ESG component that we may talk about in a later episode. There's more and more and more being asked of safety professionals than ever before. And at the same time, I've got to manage this safety management system. But, you know, particularly in those policies that involve high risk. Your confined space policies, your fall protection policies, your trenching and excavation policies, respiratory protection. You need to know what those things say. And they don't need to be in isolation. And I see them in isolation all the time. Somebody needs a policy, they put it together, it might barely meet the regulatory guidelines, and many times it doesn't meet the regulatory guidelines. So how can we have good implementation if our written programs don't even meet the bare minimums of federal OSHA?
Absolutely. And, you know, one thing I see quite often in these smaller companies is, just like you were saying, the HSE person is not only the HSE person, but what hat do you want me to put on today? I have to put my HR hat on, or I might have to go out in the field and actually do physical work, you know, and that's something that we, you know, when I see that, I always make a recommendation. This needs to be a full-time job, you know, take a lot of other stuff off of that HSE professional because he's got a lot to do, just like you said, in today's world of safety.
So I'm going to add on to this. I know you need to know what's in the policies and procedures. They need to be well written. They need to be what you say you do. But more than that, the safety professional needs to understand the job. Okay. And I know, like you said, when you're stretched thin, right? I'm sure you guys see in the audits that maybe you walk around with the safety professional and it's the first time they're seeing that work. And you're asking the questions that you could have asked long ago, right? I mean, I'm going to give an example. I worked for a crane company as a director. In the field, asked about what they were doing and how they were doing it, not only for, you know, like a field risk assessment purpose, but also to be like, okay, we say we're doing this, and when we erect a crane, is it really what we do? And many times I found that it was not. Right. And that's through, you know, years and years of work experience. They found workarounds for things there, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it's not in the procedure, right? And if the procedure is different than what the manufacturer says, or, you know, there's a reason for it, that also needs to be in there. Because if you do something differently than what you say you do, you open yourself up to liability and also to risk.
Absolutely.
So,
You know, and that's I'll tell you, you know, one of the things that we emphasize when we go in and dig into these policies and see that they're not doing things is we tell them, you know, if you don't need to have this in there, take it out. But if it's in there and you say you're going to do X, Y, Z, you better be doing X, Y, Z. You know, and they have to have proof of doing X, Y, Z as well.
so there's a lot of you go ahead, James.
I'm going to
Sorry.
throw this in here. One of the other areas moving beyond policies and procedures that I find in my assessments, and you know, I'm going to throw a statistic out there, and you know how there's statistics, and then there's lies, right? So I don't hold me to this number.
Liars use statistics.
That's right. I would say at least 95% of the contractors that I assess inside and outside the oil and gas industry are very insufficient in training. Is that your experience as well, Rich?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest findings that we have is training. And you know, it's a shame because lives depend on what you know. You know, should I be climbing into a confined space? And I have audited companies where I would find out they were doing confined space entry. I would ask to see their documentation of training, what they were training in. Well, it's trained by a third party. Well, I need to know what they're being trained in. I go talk to the third party and all they're doing is awareness training. They're not even getting into that confined space with awareness training. You know, and James found the same stuff, working at heights. You know, that's another one. I had to shut down a forklift operation just the other day because the forklift operator hadn't been trained. And, you know, it's not just being a generalized training. They have to be trained on each different type of, I don't care if it's a cat here, and then you go over to a JLG, you know, you got to be retrained. You got to go back through some documentation. And we see that's not being done a lot. So, you know, training is a very big part of this. And I'm just like James. Man, I tell you, that's one of the biggest things we find out there. A safety orientation is good enough.
Yep. Or an orientation to that specific hazard. I mean, like you said, awareness training for confined space is not confined. Well, it's awareness, right? It gets you the basics. Oh, if you have confined spaces on your site, and I, you know, I may, you can tell me I'm wrong about this, but I feel like if you have confined spaces on your site, the practical portion of that training should be on that confined space. I mean, there should be eyes laid on it. You should discuss it. And, you know, forklift training, right? You can take them on in the parking lot and do whatever you want, but really and this is going to be a bad pun, where the rubber hits the road, right? Or the rubber hits the warehouse floor is in the warehouse, right? And so, you know, if you're in a big warehousing facility, some of the training should be navigating those rows and picking boxes. I mean, maybe that's a day where you cordon off a section, but training, it doesn't get its full life until you look at it in a way that makes sense to what the worker is doing. And that's where we fall apart. Same with fall protection, right? I can do fall protection training and tell people about lanyards and harnesses and all this stuff. But unless they lay eyes on what they're going to do or practical hands-on training, it doesn't sit with the employees or stay with them.
Yeah, and you know, I run into one where they did about a 15-minute CBT on working at heights, and that's all they did. And we wound up shutting the job down and making sure that they went through a training course. I went and sat through the whole thing, made sure that it was done properly, and then they got to looking, and they had to shut down about 30, 40 more sites across the United States because they were doing the same thing. So training is a big thing that we got to look at, and I want to say competent training.
Right.
I mean, you know, and we need to be going above the bare minimum when we're training our employees for these high hazard jobs.
There's a common factor, a causal factor amongst all the contractors that I've conducted assessments when it comes to training. They look to the hiring client to tell them what they should do. That is an abdication of your responsibility as a safety professional and as a company. The hiring client is not going to tell you everything you need to know about running your safety management system. They are not your safety department. I'll say this all the time, they're not your safety mom and dad. It's up to you to develop your own assessment based on the hazards, based on the regulatory requirements, to go out there and create the training that's necessary. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, but my XYZ company didn't tell me I had to do this. They didn't tell, and they're not going to tell you how to do this. They're not there to run your company. So one, you got to get your policies and procedures right. Number two, you have to develop a training matrix of what training is required. And that information, what is awareness level training? What is orientation level training? Well, I can't go to an OSHA publication or regulation that says confined space awareness training equals this amount of time, this topics, this qualification of an instructor. It's just somebody's opinion. But I can go to OSHA publication 2254 and determine exactly what is required for confined space entrant, for confined space attendant, for confined space supervisor, for the rescue side of things. So we're all caught up into this. Well, it said the title was confined space, though now my people are competent and sometimes qualified to perform these jobs. And it's not happening. And I want to say this and throw this back out there, and then I'll let y'all talk, because sometimes I get fired up. All of safety is talking about serious injuries and fatality, and rightfully so. I am tired of doing fatality investigation. I'm tired of it. But we can't get to the causal factors of SIFs till we figure out how to do the basics of safety. I got a bunch of safety professionals that want to sit around and talk about bending the SIF trend, and when I assess them, their policies have hundreds of gaps in the written program. Their training is like Richard said, 5 minutes on working at height CBT. Their incident job hazard analysis, all to be approved. There's no hazard identification or risk assessments above the JSA level. In their incident investigations, it's always blame the worker and then put them back to the CBT that they went through 3 months ago. But you want to talk about serious injury and fatality trends. Well, we can't fix that until we fix the foundation and the lifeblood of the management system. And it's disturbing the findings that me and Richard find when we go out and do assessment.
Listen, I love a good safety chat, and I love a good theory, and I love talking, noodling around academic stuff. But I'm right on board with you, James. Where we lack it is in the application. We're not even teaching people application, really, in a lot of school curriculum, and we're certainly not teaching it when we go to conferences. People are talking all of these heady subjects, which are great. But what we really need to do is educate and mentor other safety professionals on how to do things right. And I'm right with you, James. We got to get the basics right. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I started to say this earlier, just being able to jerry-rig a system, any pre-qualification system, to give you the green check mark or the green dot or go green or whatever you want to call it, that is not safety. It's a part of your safety management system. But where your safety management system really gets in and gets dirty is in the execution of the work, in the explaining of the work, in the training that goes with it, all of those other things. And the pre-qualification system, as far as I'm concerned, having been someone that is inputted into those systems to make things go green, we need to do better, right? It's not a be all and end all. I see a lot of large companies who are contracting, and they're only concerned about their subcontractors being green, their self being green, and they're not doing the work. And being audited is doing the work, right? Make yourself vulnerable so that people can come in like yourself, Richard and James, and really get some good feedback on how to do better. Do safety better. The basics.
And I don't hear what safety and the contract management program that you're doing. It all goes back to you got to do the honest. Everybody, not everybody, is green. And the contract management programs. And when we go out there and start digging, they're not green. And then we go back and say, hey, here's what you issue this. And they're saying, well, I believe they're green in the system. Well, we can go far in this system. And we only see the way they answer questions. And then we go out and I do dig into some things. Those questions they answer are not always true. Or there would have been just what that question was asking.
Well, that's the thing that
I'm going to say nothing.
The way Veriforce works. That's Richard and I do on behalf of Veriforce are not punitive in nature. And that's why I said earlier, it's more of a art than science. I like to think of it as free consulting. Right? It doesn't leave a lot of good for the contractor participating in an audit or an assessment for somebody just come and tell me you're efficient. That's like going out there and saying, okay, well, I think you can tell me I can't doc. How are we going to fix this?
What's the treatment?
What's the treatment? So if the assessments and audits Veriforce does, they're able to give them a roadmap back to implementation. To not only be compliant, but beyond compliant. You're getting free consult is really what you're getting. And that's a great benefit that other systems that are out there really don't do. They say, hey, you got a gap, you need to fix. You got a gap, you need to fix. So I think it's really great to have someone with Richard's experience, knowledge, expertise to sit down with a contractor and tell them why they need to make recommendations to get the foundations of a safety system in place. And then come back a few years later and evaluate and say, where are we? How did you do it in your continuous improvement cycle? So I'm a big fan of the assessment process, the audit process, have Veriforce because it does three things. The first thing it does is it helps our contract. The other thing it does is it helps our clients understand the risk within the supply chain. And there is a lot of hidden risk if you're not doing audits and assessments, right? It's one thing to know if we have insurance. What I really want to know is, I don't want to find out if that insurance works or not, right? We don't want to have claims. We don't want to have incidents. We don't want to have accidents. We don't want to injure people, so we don't want to kill anyone. So by identifying gaps in implementation early on, you can be proactive.
I think that's a great statement to end on there, James. I gotta tell you, when you have somebody like Richard Enberling coming to your site and you see him coming, right? He's your ally. You see James coming to your site, he's your ally. And if your auditor is not your ally in improving your processes, then there's a problem. Get another auditor, right? Because you want somebody who's going to dive deep, get in there, and help you, right? That's the whole process. And I agree with you. One of the benefits of a verification system that has an auditing process is you have access to that improvement, and I think you should take it. So, Richard, thanks so much for coming on. James, you have any parting words?
I'll just say this. For those that are not being assessed by Richard Emberling. You can do this yourself. You can do this yourself. You can, as a safety professional, sit down, look at your programs, look at your training, look at the implementation, and create a roadmap and path of continuous improvement to move forward. That requires you to have a little bit of experience. Reach out to us. We'll give you some ideas of what you can do. Reach out to your own mentors, but start with getting that foundation in place and make sure you got the training in place, and that training is moving beyond the awareness level. If you close those two gaps to begin with, you'll close a substantial number of the findings that we find in the assessment. So you don't have to wait on me and Richard to show up on your doorstep. You can begin right now doing the things that are necessary to have a functioning safety management system that's interconnected.
Awesome.
One last thing, for the contractors is get in and read your MSAs, see what those operators are requiring, because they will spell it out a lot of times in the safety section. They will spell it out, you got to meet all the federal, state, and local and client regulations. So, you need to know what those things are. And as James said earlier, know what your policies and procedures say and do what's in there. That's the big thing. And if you say you're going to do training, do training.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for wrapping that up. This has been another episode of the Risk Matrix. Today we've had Richard Emberling on. Thank you, Richard, so much for coming. And hosted by James and myself. If you like what we're doing or you don't like what we're doing, there's a comment section down below in this video. Go ahead and chat us up, and we'd love to hear from you and take questions or criticism or whatever you got. We'd also love it if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit follow, like our posts on LinkedIn, and again, thanks for watching. We got more coming. So Richard, thanks for being in the Matrix with us. James, you want to roll tide?
Roll tide, and keep bringing them workers home safe from high hazard jobs.